Alrighty, so we're going to start the session here. I want to thank everyone again for joining us today, and welcome to the Summer Support Webinar for Education. Today's focus is going to be on the Volume Purchase Program and Managed Content Distribution. We anticipate the presentation to be around a half hour or so. Afterwards, we'll be sticking around to answer any posted questions. Feel free to send your questions at any time through the WebEx chat, and we will get as many of them answered as possible at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and will be posted for everyone to reference in the future. So with that being said, my name is Alex Pedersen, and I am an onboarding specialist here at Jamf. I am joined by John Applebaum, a customer success specialist, who will also be contributing to today's presentation. So let's jump right into what we're looking to go over in this session. We will start with a brief overview of the Volume Purchase Program, or VPP. We'll discuss some of the advantages of this technology, show how we can integrate a VPP account with the Jamf Pro, discuss methods for distributing managed content, i.e. content purchased via the Volume Purchase Program, go over some considerations and best practices in regards to VPP. Then we'll end today's session with answering some questions posted in the chat of this WebEx. So let's go ahead and start out by having John give us an overview of the Volume Purchase Program.
Thanks, Alex. So the Volume Purchase Program is an Apple deployment program that allows an organization to purchase apps or manage content in bulk through a portal and then distribute them through an MDM solution like Jamf Pro. You can find out more information by following that link at the bottom of this slide. This is also available for both iOS and macOS. A little bit of history about the Volume Purchasing Program, or VPP. This was first released in 2010 in the form of redeemable codes. They were one-time use codes that once they were redeemed, they could not be reissued. This then evolved into a user-based assignment, which allowed for a more automated workflow for assigning and revoking apps, but it did require an Apple ID in order to distribute those apps. A few years later, Apple, paying attention to what the community was looking for, in 2015 released the ability to assign VPP content to devices, particularly apps. Now, the requirements of this kind of deployment does require having iOS 9 or above, or macOS 10.11 or above. We're going to be focusing mostly on the the device-based distribution, which does require those higher or more recent releases of iOS and macOS. I wanted to note that if you are integrated with an Apple School Manager account, you'll need to set up a managed Apple ID in order to link your Apple School Manager account to the Volume Purchase Program portal, or the VPP portal. Next, we're going to kind of walk through some of the advantages of using VPP, and with that, it goes back to Alex.
All right, thanks, John. So when content is purchased in the Volume Purchase Program, and when we say purchased, that really means paid or free apps. I think purchase is more of a real estate term, as the way Apple's using it, meaning that it's just something that you've acquired or purchased. So when we purchase that in the Volume Purchase Program, we have the option of purchasing apps with managed licenses. These would be considered managed apps, and the VPP portal is the only way that you can actually acquire managed content for distribution. With managed apps, content can be assigned to a device opposed to an Apple ID. This is eliminating the requirement of having the end user be signed into a device with an Apple ID in order to receive content directly from the Jamf Pro. An end user could also be signed in with a personal or alternate Apple ID to access their own personal content they may have purchased. And the fact that we can still assign content to the device, we can basically have our managed apps from the Jamf Pro be deployed in addition to anything that's personal, because they can sign in with an Apple ID in addition to those device assignments. Printing out a spreadsheet of codes and having end users redeem them in the App Store, which ties the content to the Apple ID indefinitely, is really becoming a thing of the past. You can still go that route if you're feeling nostalgic, but really the whole codes and redeeming them and having them gone indefinitely is a thing of the past. Managed licenses can also be revoked from devices for redistribution. This is very nice and very applicable in, for example, one-to-one environments, because we can assign our apps to be grade specific, for example. So that way we can redistribute them to the applicable devices come the new school year. So life without VPP. Prior to the volume purchase program, content distribution options were having a common Apple ID used to purchase the content and then physically sign in to the device, go to the App Store and download it. Codes could also be provided to the end user for redemption in the App Store, but because a credit card is required for an Apple ID, or a standard Apple ID, parents would need a separate account for any users under the age of 13. Even with the volume purchase program, pre-device assignability, before we had that feature functionality, end users would have to be signed into a device and accept a VPP invitation prior to receiving content from the Jamf Pro. Basically, you would be sending an invitation that could be accepted either via email or through our self-service program, and that would make the association to the user and their Apple ID between both the Jamf Pro and Apple. Apple IDs are still required with ebook distribution due to copyright law, but the process has been made at least a little bit easier with Apple School Manager, as we can basically assign that to managed Apple IDs, ones that you create in the Apple School Manager portal, and just gives you overall more ability to manage those IDs. I would encourage anyone interested in those features for managed Apple IDs and other items within Apple School Manager to check out our videos on the YouTube channel and on Jamf Nation for more information on the configuration, integration, and features of the Apple School Manager portal. And so let's take a look at how we're going to actually configure the VPP inside of the Jamf Pro. And for that, I'll swing it back to John here.
Thanks. And for anyone that's joined the webinar late, just a reminder, this will be a recorded session. If you do have questions that come up during the webinar, feel free to put that into the Q&A section of the WebEx so that we do have some moderators looking at that room constantly. So if there's any questions that come up, that's where we'll see them. To actually configure your VPP account, the first step is really going to be creating that first connection with VPP. If you are using Apple School Manager, again, a managed Apple ID generated from that system is used to create that connection to this portal. If you're not using Apple School Manager, you'll be going to the volume.itunes.apple.com and signing up. You'll have to put in additional details about your organization, your school, and then you'll be able to start purchasing apps and content for your deployment. A couple things to note here: if you already have an account in a previous MDM, if you already have that VPP connected to a previous MDM solution, including Profile Manager, Apple Configurator, we'll want to ensure that the token has been revoked and that the password for your VPP has been changed. Now, the password will actually be changed for the Apple ID, and you would do that under appleid.apple.com. Basically, the idea is we'll revoke content, but just as another precaution, we'll make sure that there's no way for the old solution to contact the VPP account. And to do that, we just have to update the password used for that Apple ID that's logged in, that is used to log into the VPP account. The next step is actually downloading the token from your VPP account. When you're logged in, it's kind of hidden a little bit, but it's actually under your username, and there's a drop-down for Account Summary. From there, you'll see on the right that there's now an option under the Managed Distribution portion for downloading a token. This is a master key for your VPP account, so that's why it's tied between one account to one MDM, and we don't want it to be in multiple MDMs or multiple Profile Manager solutions. Essentially, you can have multiple VPP accounts, so that is an option for you if you need to segregate out where apps are coming from and you're purchasing, but generally we want just the token from one VPP account to be in one MDM solution. The next step is to actually set up the VPP connection within your Jamf Pro server. This is located under Settings, Global Management, and then VPP accounts, highlighted in red at the top. You'll then be given the option to create a new VPP connection. If you have multiple, you can add them here as well. The next step will be to upload that actual token into the Jamf Pro server. The fields highlighted in red will have to be manually entered here, as well as actually uploading that token. Once the token is uploaded, all of that information from the VPP portal will populate for you. A note here on the Populate Purchase Content option toward the bottom is a checkbox. If that box is checked, it will auto-populate your mobile device App Store and Mac App Store, the app catalog, if you will, for the Jamf Pro server. This makes it easy if you have all your purchasing information in VPP. You're not going to have to replicate those records manually within your Jamf Pro server. We can just have this connection make that happen for you. Continuing on with uploading that token, you'll see here that the best practice here is if there's a previously affiliated with an MDM, the best practice again is to change the password for that Apple ID prior to downloading that token. This is again just to ensure that there's no connection to any other MDM solutions that you may have used in the past, or if you've used Jamf now, or if you're migrating from an existing Jamf Pro environment to a new Jamf Pro environment. Additionally, there's an option at the bottom here for revoking all apps. This is another measure where you can reclaim licenses from VPP. So if you happen to have those licenses were distributed through a different solution and you no longer have access to it, we can use this option to revoke all those app licenses back so that we can use them in Jamf Pro. Additionally, if this is something you do, if you're thinking about during the summer of having a refresh and want to reclaim all your licenses, you can use this button to do that as well. I would just caution to use it sparingly because it is a all or nothing option.
Yeah, I just want to make one quick point on that too, John, just because I had a call about this literally an hour ago. When we talk about changing the password, you want to make sure that you have that accomplished prior to downloading the token from the portal. And basically the credentials, the username and the password, that is embedded inside of that token. So when you download it, it is going to be using the credentials that you have used to log in when you download the token to reconnect to the portal. Just the call I was on earlier today, they had changed all the passwords, but they download the token and then they update the passwords. Well, you're not going to be able to connect because that change for the credentials, the username, i.e. the Apple ID, and the password is not going to be reflected in that token that you downloaded previously. So just make sure that you do change the password for the account that is logging into a portal, and then change the password, and then download the token. And what that will do is break all other associations because that password has been changed, and the only viable token at that point is going to be the one you just downloaded because that will have the updated credential information. Just want to throw that clarification out.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's common now. We're seeing more and more customers coming on board with Jamf that have used a previous MDM solution, so they've used VPP before. That's why we're pointing these features out. If you've never used an MDM solution before, you're not going to have to do this. You're going to be setting up a fresh VPP instance and connecting it to your Jamf Pro server. One other thing that we wanted to draw your attention to is just the expiration date that you can see here. This is actually coming in from the VPP portal. The Jamf Pro server will actually give you an alert about 30 days prior to the expiration date, letting you know that this token is about to expire. To renew that token, we just need to go back into your VPP account and re-download that token and then upload it again into the Jamf Pro server, just to refresh it essentially. And we do have some videos on our YouTube channel that kind of walk you through those steps. Once we've actually got that token in place, this will start to populate the content that you've purchased prior from your VPP account. You'll see that this is actually showing a list of iOS apps that you've purchased. This will show any additional ebooks or Mac App Store apps that you've purchased as well on the additional tabs. This is actually updated on a frequent basis with VPP, so if you make additional purchases throughout the day or throughout the year, this will be updated automatically. There is a check that happens in the back end on a frequent basis. It may not happen immediately once you make a purchase, but that information will come into your Jamf Pro server and make it available for you to use. We can actually then confirm that once we've added the VPP token, we can then see the App Store catalog, or in this case, the mobile device App Store catalog, populate in the Jamf server, showing all the all the apps that were previously purchased through VPP now have app records. And this allows us then to actually deploy these apps. If we didn't have that pre-populate or populate the purchase content selected under VPP accounts, we'd have to manually create each of these app catalog records in order to deploy successfully. You'll notice here that one of the apps that we have from VPP is Google Docs. As an example, we just wanted to show you that you'll see that it doesn't have information listed under VPP type, purchased, total purchased, in use, and remaining. This is because this app is not configured yet for device-based deployment. That's an additional step that we'd have to do in order to get it configured to deploy out to devices. And we're focusing on device-based deployment because the majority of VPP deployments that we see are device-based. And this is a reminder, anything that you have in this app catalog is unique to your Jamf Pro environment. If you delete a record from this section, this doesn't affect your VPP account at all. Nothing has changed on the VPP side. That's all coming in from Apple. Making changes, deleting a particular app from the app catalog here does not make any changes in terms of your licenses or what you purchased through VPP. And then with that, we're kind of transitioning over to how you actually would manage or distribute that content out to your devices.
Cool. I'll take it from here. So now that we have our VPP portal integrated, right, with the token, and our content has populated into the Jamf Pro app catalog, we can look into different options for how we're going to distribute that to devices. Right now, we're going to focus on mobile devices, just because it's going to be essentially the same with a couple other caveats when we talk about Mac OS. But just to keep it simple, for today, we're going to be just showing an example of a mobile app deployment. So this example will be assigning the app SumDog to some devices, assuming that they are enrolled in the Jamf Pro and not signed in with an Apple ID. Two distribution methods that we have would be installing the app automatically and silently on the devices. Other option is to make the app available in self-service, which self-service is the Jamf Pro exclusive app store, which Jamf admins can customize to whatever you need to meet the needs of your environment. Self-service will always be the default distribution method for newly populated apps. So if you have that automatic populate apps in the app catalog checked and they all flood in there, the default distribution method will always be set to make available in self-service. So moving from the General tab, which we were just under, over to the Scope tab, we can choose our targets that we want to have the app either install automatically on or to make available in self-service, depending on which distribution method we chose. I would highly recommend that you take a look at the Scope page inside our online admin guide, just to see kind of different options that you do have for scoping. And if you're unaware of how to get to the online guide, it's simply docs.jamf.com. That will populate you to the latest version of our online guide. So just kind of looking here, I just threw up a bunch of examples as far as what some targets would be. Just for like granularity, you can do a building if you have it defined. You could do an entire department if you have it defined. Individual mobile devices, a static or smart group, as well as users. So as John mentioned before, how that Google Docs one was a little bit different than the others because it didn't have the device assignability enabled. It's under the VPP tab that we need to do that. Not all apps have been made device assignable by the developers, which is why this option is not being enabled by default in the Jamf Pro. And I would say it's safe to say that 95 to 99% of all apps that are actively being updated for the past 2 years or so will have this functionality. If the checkbox is ever not present under this tab, this is an indication that the app developers have not enabled the device assignability function. And more likely, if you see that in an app, that app probably hasn't been updated in many, many years. Once this is enabled, the license information will populate. Please note any devices that with apps assigned to them, i.e. targets under the Scope tab, this will use a license regardless if it's actually installed or not. In use does not mean installed, but rather available to be installed, whether that be automatically or via self-service. If we have multiple VPP tokens in our Jamf Pro, we can choose the appropriate one from that drop-down at the bottom there. And multiple VPP tokens in the Jamf Pro is pretty common in education. When we have different departments or districts that are in the same Jamf Pro, but their budgeting is going to be segregated amongst different departments, buildings, etc. Also, some schools may require separate VPP tokens for federal and state funding for devices that are assigned to students with special needs. It's another pretty common example of why we have multiple VPP portals and then subsequently multiple VPP tokens in the Jamf Pro. So after we've gotten everything scoped and saved, whether we chose install automatically or make available in self-service, that will happen to any of the devices that were in the scope for that particular app. Install automatically, it will push and install on those iPads right away. If it was made available in self-service, when an end user opens up self-service, they will then be able to see them within there. So talking about revoking that content or getting the licenses back, I'll let John take that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And this might be something that you're going through right now this summer as you're looking to do a refresh on your devices and on your deployment. One thing that you want to be aware of, or probably the major thing that you want to be aware of with any kind of MDM communication, whether it's configuration profiles or app deployments, is really scope is what controls where this gets installed or if it gets uninstalled. So to revoke the license from use, you just need to remove those devices or those users or those groups from that target list of your scope for that particular app record. So if there's no targets, there's no license assignments. Those get pulled back and re-added back to your VPP token, and then they're available again for distribution if you need them. It's as simple as that. Also, if you are using device-based deployment, this will remove the app as well from the device. So when you unscope the app, it actually takes the license off, which is one piece, but it also removes the app if you're using device-based assignment. We can then search and verify kind of where our uses are of different apps by using the search VPP content for both mobile devices and computers. This is an option where we're just searching all our VPP content just by doing a blank search of search VPP content. We'll see that this has different totals of what's in use and what's been assigned. If we click on those numbers, like the one that's been highlighted here for Wunderlist, we could actually see additional information, which is displayed here. You'll see that the top number is very large. That's the number that Apple believes is available for use. So this is actually coming from the VPP token itself. Numbers underneath there are what's actually being assigned through Jamf Pro. So there might be some differences and discrepancies from time to time. This may be an indication that there is another MDM or another solution that's using the same token, whether it's Profile Manager or Apple Configurator or a different MDM solution entirely that actually has assignments based on the same VPP token. If you were to click on any of these tabs, you'd see the different computers, devices, or users that have that app assigned to them. You'd be able to click on their name and see their inventory record and additional details about that device, just so you could track down what device it is or what user has that app. So we've kind of moved through the major elements of connecting to VPP, making sure that we can distribute some content through device-based deployment, as well as the steps that you need to take in order to revoke those apps from particular devices or users. However, if you've been familiar with VPP for a while or trying to do app deployments, you know that there's definitely other things that you might want to consider as part of your deployment strategy for VPP. And I think Alex has some good tips as to what you should think about this year and for the future.
Sure. So my first consideration, we're probably a little late for, but the earlier the better. Throughout the months of July, August, and September, Apple's VPP servers are really getting flooded with tens, if not hundreds of thousands of schools, enrolling devices, and MDM, and then obviously purchasing content, having that content being deployed. And every time that you do have a license that's being associated, Apple is making a calculation on that on the back end. So I would say that, if you can kind of get on that and you know what kind of content you need to be deployed and make those associations like before July, that would probably be the best, because it's going to be just a lot speedier and a lot less hiccups could arise if you do it earlier. Having a granular approach to device enrollments and subsequently app distributions will make life much easier for starting a new school year. The most common workflow would be, for example, configuring your departments and buildings in the Jamf Pro and having them assigned to your DEP pre-stage enrollment. So that way, when you're erasing the devices in preparation for the next year, which is also considered a best practice, any content that you have scoped to the building and department within the assigned pre-stage will either be maintained or updated based on your provisioning. So if you have a department for 3rd grade and you have a batch of devices that are moving from 2nd grade to 3rd grade, you change the department from 2nd to 3rd for next year, and when you re-enroll them, wipe them out, and then they go into the pre-stage and get the updated department, any app, and to take even further, any configuration profile that you have in scope for 3rd grade will get deployed or made available upon enrollment. If you are ever, I skipped ahead here. Yeah, if you ever prompted for an Apple ID on a device when you are trying to implement everything to be device assignable, first thing I always look at is making sure that self-service is being deployed as a managed app. This can be a pretty common culprit for that behavior. The self-service is by default in the Jamf Pro set to be pushed automatically from the Jamf Pro and not through a VPP portal. So always make sure that if you are being prompted for an Apple ID, to go to your VPP portal, purchase however many free licenses that you need for self-service, and deploy it that way. If you are continuing to get prompted after you've got the self-service squared away, the best place for that is to look under the Management tab of any device that's getting prompted for an Apple ID within the device record of that device in the Jamf Pro. And under there, you can determine which app is actually prompting for an Apple ID. Take a look at that app then in the app catalog and ensure that we have that assigned VPP content checkbox checked. Remember, that's the checkbox that you need to have checked to enable device assignability. If the checkbox is not present, more than likely the developer has not enabled that content, or it might have just been one that we missed checking while we were setting up our apps. If using sites in the Jamf Pro and plan on actually assigning VPP accounts to a site, I just ask that you please review the site page on our online admin guide to ensure we are using sites appropriately and that this functionality is in fact applicable to your environment. I would say probably about 7 out of 10 times I see customers using sites. It's usually being applied unnecessarily and adding a lot of unneeded overhead to the Jamf Pro management. And self-service can really be a Jamf admin's, a network admin's, and even an end user's best friend. If ever contemplating whether an app should be installed automatically or by the end user via self-service, always go with self-service, as that will result in a lot less traffic flooding. When we do like 30 apps to 100 devices and they're all set to install automatically, that's just a crazy amount of traffic. You got to think of every app for every device times whatever. And this will also encourage familiarity with self-service to the end users. And remember, self-service is not just for app distribution. You can have configuration profiles in the iOS world for self-service, and then in the Mac OS world, we can put policies in there, configuration profiles, and really printers, anything that you can think of, you can make available for the end user in self-service. Another thing to consider is having a caching server on site. Having a caching service on the network will result in keeping traffic to devices on the local network opposed to all apps coming down from the App Store. Now, macOS has an added association in regards to device-based VPP. There needs to be an association to the local account on a computer, and basically there's just an additional link to a local account on a computer to Apple for receiving device-based content. I would recommend taking a look at the Mac App Store apps page on the online guide, and also check out our knowledge base article on the enabling MDM for local accounts, or local user accounts, as those are both going to be applicable to deploying managed Mac App Store apps to devices. If we are moving from a previous MDM solution to the Jamf Pro and we are migrating that VPP token, again, just ensure that we got that password changed and all licenses revoked prior to uploading a new token to the Jamf Pro. If an existing VPP portal has downloadable codes being reported under the purchase history, I provide a link here that you can follow, and that link will give some instructions on how you can convert those codes to managed licenses if it's applicable. And last but not least here, ebooks purchased in the VPP portal still need an Apple ID association. I'd recommend that you review the user-based VPP assignments and ebook distribution pages on our online guide to see a little more about that workflow. And again, with the ebooks, that does become a lot easier if you are integrated with Apple School Manager and are creating managed Apple IDs within. So all the resources that we have listed here, and there's another page with more, are either links to the admin guide that I had explicitly mentioned, or maybe just mentioned you should take a look at. So yeah, I do encourage you, if you are looking or have any more questions about like the scoping, managed apps, integrating with VPP, to just follow these links. And I kind of put them in a, I guess, my own subjective order of importance that you probably want to take a look at them, starting from the top of the page here to the bottom of the next page. And again, this webinar is going to be available online. I think that's going to wrap it up here. I just want to thank everyone for joining us here. Hope you found this content to be beneficial. And John and I will now answer some of the questions that have been posted in the WebEx. So I guess we'll just take a moment here and kind of review those quick, and then we'll start addressing them.
Yeah, absolutely. Like as Alex said, this is a recorded webinar, so we'll make it available online and provide that information to you after the webinar. So don't feel like you need to write down all these resources that we provided. This will be something that you can reference back to in the future. But we did receive a couple different questions that came in through the Q&A. If you do have questions that come up that you haven't had a chance to, or as we're talking about other things, feel free to throw that into the Q&A section of the WebEx so that we can have our moderators review those and send that over to us. The Q&A section, it's kind of confusing in the WebEx. There's both a Q&A and a chat. Please use the Q&A because that's seen more visibly by everyone.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and
the first question, I think, is from Terry. The question is, do we need Apple School Manager to use VPP? And no, you don't. You don't need to have Apple School Manager in order to use VPP. You can have a separate account for VPP and not use Apple School Manager. If you do use Apple School Manager, though, it's recommended to, again, create that managed Apple ID to link it to a VPP account so that you can start using VPP through Apple School Manager the way that it's really designed to work that way. But if you're not on Apple School Manager yet, you don't have to convert over to Apple School Manager.
Yeah, and the biggest benefit in regards to VPP and Apple School Manager is, again, if you need to deploy iBooks, ebooks, you can create managed Apple IDs, have control over those, because remember, Apple IDs are required for ebooks, and it just makes life quite a bit easier if you are forced to, or you absolutely have to get ebooks deployed. The managed Apple IDs just makes life a little bit easier because you can do some auto assignments and have more control over those managed Apple IDs.
The next question we have is from Jen, and it's around, does the total purchased field count for managed distribution only, or will it show old codes as well, meaning both the managed licenses and the code-based previous deployment that people may have been using?
Yeah, and with that, it is just the managed. Codes are going to be reported separately from managed licenses, and the code reporting isn't live like the license totals that you're seeing when you look at the app catalog or even within the app under the VPP tab. To get the most current results, you can always download a new spreadsheet from the VPP portal. But yeah, the numbers that you're seeing on the, because we call it the parent page of the app catalog or under the VPP tab of a specific app, those totals are going to be how many managed licenses are available and in use.
We have another question from Terry is around, can I create a CSV file of all free apps that we use across 7 carts and get licenses and load those into Jamf? So basically, some people have different deployment methods that they're using, but the app licenses need to be searched and purchased individually through that VPP portal in order to update your VPP account in Jamf Pro. Once they're purchased through the VPP portal, the license will then just kind of sync back into Jamf Pro on that schedule that we were talking about, and then they'll be available for distribution.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that the crux of this question is, I have 7 carts, they all need these free apps. How can I make that a super easy process? And I think that really boils back down to your provisioning. So if you have 7 carts, right, and they're individual carts, but they all need the same free app, you would have your pre-stage in some manner, preferably either using the building or department, assign them to their specific cart. And then when you go into the app themselves, you would just use that cart or that group of carts, or even create a new group that encompasses all carts, and then have that to either install automatically or make available in self-service. So when those devices are enrolled or they go through the pre-stage again for next year, those apps will go out to those devices.
Okay, so another question we have is, how would you distribute a paid app that is purchased with 2 different VPP accounts? And this question came from Josh.
Yep, so if you want to distribute the same app that is purchased in multiple VPP accounts, when you go into your app catalog, you will have that drop-down option that you can specify which portal the licenses are coming from. So if you have a paid app that was purchased in one portal, needs to go to one device, and that same app was purchased in a different portal and needs to go to a device that's associated with that account, you would just go into the app catalog and then for the first instance, choose the appropriate VPP account, and then you would make another entry of that app in the app catalog, and you would then choose the other VPP account from that drop-down under the VPP tab of the app. Is that what that says?
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I think that's the way to go for the most part. Like you were talking about sites, and I think there's other people that tend to try to use sites to do that sort of segregation of VPP accounts, because you can have a VPP token associated to a site, and that's how they're using it. But I don't believe that's
absolutely not
a great way to do that.
Well, it depends. I mean, sites is really for if you have multiple JSS admins, right? So you got different users that are logging into the actual interface, and you want to limit what they can see and manage. I mean, sometimes I think that sites should be spelled SIGHT, because that's really what it does, is it limits what you can see when you are logged into the Jamf Pro. That is not a requirement, or it's not needed for segregating out different VPP accounts or distributing content. Now, if you have maybe a media specialist or a teacher, and they are actually purchasing content and they're actually distributing content and they have their own devices that they are managing. That is where a site would come into play, because they would not be able to see or manage or even affect anything else inside the Jamf Pro than the devices and VPP accounts that you have assigned to that specific site. Sites are just kind of like mini JSSs within a JSS, but it is certainly not a requirement for having multiple accounts and being able to distinguish where content and which VPP account that content is coming from and where the licenses are getting used from.
Yeah, perfect. I think we're kind of reached the end. We don't have any more questions that we have in the queue yet. But again, there's plenty of resources that Alex has put together for us that we can review whenever you guys need this. Again, it's going to be a recorded session. If you have additional questions, you're welcome to send that to us through Jamf support. Also, we have the Jamf Nation community, and like we mentioned, a YouTube channel that shows a lot of these, some of these common workflows like uploading the VPP token and things like that. With that, I appreciate you guys attending today. There will be a August webinar focusing on tvOS, and you're free to attend that one as well. You just have to register and to get the reminder through Jamf Nation. So with that, thank you, and I hope you have a great summer and hope everything goes well with your deployments.
Yep, thanks guys.